I'm concerned. Maybe I should record this another way. So,
Mhm.
yeah. So, hi, Brian.
Hi, Mark.
Nice to see you.
Good to see
Um,
you too.
yeah. So you're at Cal. I see the Cal Arts thing behind you and everything. That's cool.
Yeah, that's yeah. I'm up in my office at Cal Arts,
Yeah.
yeah, just hanging out.
Good. Thank you very much for your time today.
You're welcome.
I really do appreciate this very much, and I'm sure my students will appreciate this as well.
I hope so.
So, how to start here? So basically, right? So we've spoken a bit, about this, and
Hmm.
I'm teaching, literature classes at a couple of universities, a few universities in Tokyo. I have been for several years now, and this is the first time I'm teaching the work of Brian Evenson. And so the students are being introduced to your work, Fugue State, right? So this is from
Right.
several years ago. Actually, this was published when I was studying with you
Yes.
as
Yeah.
a student at Brown. And it
Yeah.
was very,
As an MFA student. Yeah. Hmm.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm teaching this in sort of a more straightforward, if you will, class on a literature class. Um, so my first question actually was, who is Brian Evenson? Who are you? That was my first question.
I mean, that's in a way that's the most complicated question that one can have.
Exactly. That's right.
Yeah, I feel like I've lived about two or three different lives. I am, as you know, I was raised Mormon. I'm an excommunicated Mormon now, very happily excommunicated, and now live. I live in California. I have lived all over the place. You and I met in, I think we met in Oregon first, and then we
Yes, that's
met
right.
later then we worked together later at Brown in Rhode Island. So I've kind of lived all over the place. I'm a little bit of a wandering soul.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm someone who used to be one thing and now I'm another thing. And writing is kind of the thing that's been the through line with all those things, the thing that is connected to me, whether, before I left the Mormon church and after.
Right. I was curious, and maybe I've read this somewhere in an interview and I've forgotten it, much as many of the characters in your stories forget lots of things and get real confused. And wait a minute, was it? Wait, maybe, but no. What was my
Yeah.
name in Fugue State? I was just rereading this morning.
Yeah.
What a
Yeah.
creepy story. But anyway, so yeah, I've forgotten the question. No, the question was, what was your in, if you will, or what was that? I don't know if it's a eureka moment or the moment when you realized not that you wanted to be a writer, but that you were a writer, if you will,
Yeah.
or what was sort of that moment early on, assuming early on before your first publications and all that. I mean,
Hmm.
and also, like around what age were you, that kind of thing. I don't
Yeah.
know the story. Maybe I have, like I say, but for the sake of not only myself, but also those who may be
Yeah.
viewing this. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, I'd talk about two things that were kind of important for me. One was when I was pretty young, maybe 11 or 12, my mom decided that she wanted to write a science fiction story for an anthology that was coming out. And she was like, she's an architect, so was trained. Her degree was in English, but then she went on to get an advanced degree in architecture. And so she just decided to do this. I'm the oldest of five kids, and so to give herself time, she just set all the kids up doing different things. So my youngest brother and sisters, excuse me, would kind of do art or things like that. And then the sister right down from me, I think she encouraged her to read or do something like that. And with me, she just said, "Oh, you should just go ahead and write and just do the same thing." And so I was like, "Okay." And so I started it and realized I really enjoyed it very, very quickly. It was I don't think she realized what she was creating with me. but and then I kept on doing it after that. It was something that I kind of have done pretty consistently from then. And then the other thing that was really important to me was when I was maybe 14, my dad uh, had just become in charge of general education for Brigham Young University, the university that he taught at.
Right.
And so he brought home all these books that were considered classic books, and one of them was Kafka. The basic Kafka. And he read some and he was like, I bet Brian would like this. And so he kind of sat down with me and he read one of the stories and he talked about it, and then he just left the book with me.
Wow.
And so I started reading that, and I think that really changed my life in terms of it was so different than anything I'd read before, and it really opened me up to writing in a weird way. So.
Was it Metamorphosis, or was it something else? The first story that he was read.
The first story was it was a story that's almost a forgettable story. It's called I think it's called An Encounter, and it's not one of his famous stories. I don't know quite what it was that my dad really liked about it, but there are interesting things about it, and there's a kind of almost like theatrical quality to it. And it just felt weird, but it wasn't like, he didn't start me off with the Metamorphosis, which of course I love, or the Penal Colony, which I really love as well.
Right.
But just with a story about this encounter on the streets and something that happens, and that was just weird enough to get me interested and keep me reading.
That's excellent. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Just on a personal note, because you bring up Kafka. Kafka seems like this larger than life sort of pivot around which many of us have been revolving for so many years in so many ways. And so when I was a kid, Kafka was one of the first things that kind of blew my mind as well. One of the first authors, as well as Beckett and Waiting for Godot and those kinds of things. And of course, I asked about Metamorphosis because, that's the one that's taught when Kafka is taught at schools and things, right?
Right.
It seems to be. And that was I don't remember if it was the whole thing because it's kind of long for a short story. It's sort of a novella or novelette or something, right? But it was like, we had it in class and it was like, whoa, what is this? That kind of reaction maybe that you had too. And then I went and I bought the complete, and went through those stories as well. So that's really cool to hear you say that Kafka was the one that kind of.
Yeah, no, it was really important to me. And then, I Beckett as well, but Beckett came a little later for me. I was probably 17 by the time I read Beckett, and stumbled across him there was this great used bookstore in Utah that had a lot of those Oak Grove Press editions. They used to publish these absurd plays and then a lot of Beckett. And so I started reading those and then came across Beckett and just really fell in love with it.
That's cool. I have more questions and I want to keep asking, but because of the time thing, I want to sort of, we have to talk about various other things, but I want to use this to move into the next in terms of, just connections, right? And those are interesting. Yeah. So we're talking about Kafka and Beckett. And as you may know, I think you do know, you do know, I'm sure by now, where I've told you, we've talked about, I did Kobo Abe, Abe Kobo in Japanese, right? I did Japanese literature before I came to Brown and did creative writing with you and the others at Brown. And, Kafka is like a major influence on Abe Kobo Abe, right? Yeah. And he's writing in that kind of world. And I know that you've read some of his work as well. And then, so I was sort of coming off of that. I finished my master's degree. I did my thesis on Kobo Abe's work, and he has in Japanese, actually, unfortunately, it's never been translated into English, something called Laughing Moon, Warautsuki, which is essays about his creative process, and he talks about how he takes his dreams, and writes notebooks and things. Anyway, blah, 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 blah. But why I'm saying this is because then, to move into the Brian Evenson story here, the first thing that I read of yours was The Wavering Knife. Yeah. The first story. And I had just finished the master's degree, and I was like, what am I doing with my life? I think I was working an office job or something. I didn't know what I was doing because I couldn't get a job teaching Japanese literature right off the bat,
Right,
And
right.
the first story in this, as you know, is the White Square. And the White Square, I picked this book up. There was something about the cover. There was something about the look of it.
Yeah.
Something about this photo of this kind of slightly scary looking guy in the back.
Yeah,
And I was
yeah.
like, this looks cool. This looks like something I would like, And I start reading in the Borders bookstore, White Square. And it just had that feeling, that weird feeling you're describing, maybe that you got when you read Kafka or Beckett or these early on in your right, in your youth. And
yeah.
right. And I know we've spoken about all kinds of weird stuff like at Brown and beyond, but Dwyer Matt and all this stuff. But so this was my into Brian Evenson. There was something about that also connects to me for people like Paul Auster and ghosts in particular, with the colors and identity as a theme. So I end up being too talkative. I have to let you talk because the whole purpose is you. But I want to kind of give the background. So that was my in. And then Fugue State, I want to get to that too because we're doing that in class.
Absolutely.
And this kind of worlds that you create. So my question, I guess, is what would you say is your major theme or themes, number one? I mean, in terms of genre, because I know genre, and I'd like you to talk about that at some point too, about the genre thing, because you delve and dip into so many different genres throughout your work, and of course you have Evans and all that stuff, and the students don't know any of this yet. So, and so what do you think your major theme or themes are, have been, and how, if they have changed in any way over the years? I mean,
that's a really good question. Partly, I do think it changes a little bit from book to book. I feel like every book is focusing on a set of notions or ideas. So, but I do think that the common thing that you get through a lot of the stories, there's a lot about the instability of the world in a lot of the books. There's a lot of characters who are uncertain about where they stand in relation to the world, and who kind of struggle through. And I do think that's something that's been there from very, very early on. There's a kind of strand of absurdity that's often common there as well. But it does also shift from book to book. I feel like the later books that I've done have been more focused on thinking about genre. So there's a lot of stories that seem to be in a science fiction or horror or other genres, and they're kind of responding to just the notion of genre in general. And then a lot of stories in the book that's coming out, which is called Good Night, Sleep Tight, which is kind of which is playing around with the notion of what it means to be human, or what it means to be beyond being human, that sort of thing. So it does change, but I think there are some commonalities there for sure.
Okay. I mean, what is that? Ellipse of absurdity or something? This thing you're talking. You're talking about this kind of thing that not only the characters are uncertain and kind of struggling through, but there's also that absurd aspect you mentioned, right? And I certainly find, again, this morning I was just rereading Fugue State, the title story, and going, whoa, this really, whoa, we haven't gotten there yet in the class. Actually, we've only read, let me talk about the class and what we've read. And actually, I'm glad you mentioned Good Night, Sleep Tight. I wanted to ask you about that. The first class, we haven't started the textbook, right? It's the first day of classes. No one's even bought the thing usually, right? So what I usually do in all of my literature classes the first day is I'll read something online. With Brian Evenson, that's no problem, because there's lots of, stuff you published in online journals. And so I can do a search. Now, in the past, in my non-Brian Evenson, non-Fugue State classes, I've had American literature classes where I'm doing like typical 19th, 20th century introduction to starting with Poe, which I want to talk about Poe. I have a million questions actually, and
Sure.
we don't, have all day either of us. So, or all night in your case. I actually am teaching after this.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So, but I've done what I wanted to say is I've shared Wind Eye.
Yeah.
I think it's Pen America. It's published, and so I've read that.
That's
Is
right.
that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I've shared that with students a number of times in the non-class, and I was planning on doing it again. And because I have this memory thing too, you see, but I always come back. That's interesting. What was it again? Oh yeah. Oh, my name was it Bartow or no, or what was it? I forget, but it was that. So this time I thought maybe one of these students have taken my classes before and they're wearing masks even still in Japan, and maybe I just don't recognize, and I don't want to. So I won't do Wind Eye for the Brian Evenson class. So I went online and what I plucked out this time was I have my notes and I can't access them now. Was it Never Old, Never?
Never little, never grown, I think is what it is.
Never, right? Never grown. And I'm wondering then, because that deals with this kind of post-human or AI-ish, because in fact, the students, I asked them, what do you think the genre of this is?
Yeah.
It's in Japan.
Yeah.
And almost unanimously, they said it's science fiction.
Yeah.
It was like, there wasn't even a question about it in the students' minds. I wasn't suggesting that. So, but they were like, oh, it's science fiction, obviously, kind of thing. Right, and in Japan, there's that tradition with like Akira and these old like anime things. And I thought, wow, this would be a hit in Japan, because it kind of deals with those themes that Japanese writers and animators have been dealing with since at least the 80s or before that.
Right.
Do machines have feelings? Can AI have emotion? And now that's, of course, part of like our reality in some ways.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So without me, I'm too much of a chatterbox. I need to let you talk. But to preface this, firstly, I'm curious if that's part of the collection. And if the answer is yes or no, whatever it is, maybe you can talk more about the collection as well.
Yeah. No, sure. I can talk about it. Yeah. It'll come out in September. The title is Good Night, Sleep Tight. That's part of it. Never Little, Never Grown. And then there's there's probably a half dozen stories that I see as kind of in a space that's similar to that, where it's, in some cases it's machines that don't realize they're machines, that they become convinced they're human.
Right.
In other cases, it's machines trying to figure out how to live with humans, realizing that they're, often being mistreated. And so it explores different aspects of that. And I think, as I had this weird experience where someone used AI to make a fake book under my name, and which did make me think a lot about, how much do I want to, it probably made me more attentive to these issues, even though I was already starting to write on them before this. So, but it's a mix, the new book. So the one thing I really like to do, and I do this to some degree in Fugue State, is take different genres and see what happens when you kind of put them together, give them a kind of literary affect, I suppose, and then have them talk to each other in various ways. So there's stories in that. The title story, Good Night, Sleep Tight, is kind of in a horror story space. And in fact, it actually responds to Japanese ghost stories. There's moments in that. So, and then there's other pieces that are kind of doing other sorts of things. I think there's at least one detective story in there. There's one that's more realistic. There's a lot of stories about mothers and their relationship to either children or to machines that think they're children. So that's something that comes up several times. So yeah. Okay. I don't know what that's about for me, but for whatever reason, I'm interested in that at the moment. So yeah.
I love that response about, I don't know what it's about to me. But it's good. I want the students to hear authors say things like, well, actually, I myself don't really know what this is about, and leave the interpretation to the reader. So I think, like in university system, in the university system, it's like creativity is kind of a little bit, you know, I
Yeah.
mean, Brown was kind of a special case, you know, that's
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
non-academic in a way, like from the artist side or the creative side. But generally, when we're studying literature at the university level, right? And I know, obviously, you teach literature, you've
Mhm.
taught literature. You have, I think, a
Yeah. Yeah.
philosophy degree in philosophy as
I,
well.
I have a critical theory degree.
Critical theory, right?
Yeah.
It
Mhm.
shows in
Yeah.
your
Mhm.
work.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to say was I'm also teaching the period before I teach the Brian Evenson class today.
Hmm.
I'm teaching Stephen Millhauser Disruptions, which is the
Oh.
newest collection. Today we're doing something called a beheading, which is very Evansonian, I think.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
that's kind of perfect timing. But why I'm bringing that up is because Millhauser said something similar in an interview, which I showed the students, to what you're saying now, and to what I think you said in another interview that I showed from YouTube. Maybe you don't.
Yeah. No, it's yeah.
I think you said something similar, like, which is that, like, it's like what Millhauser was saying is, you know, there are aspects of the stories where it is open-ended, and even I'm not quite sure.
Yeah.
He's asked
Yeah.
a question about that by the interviewer, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
how do we interpret, you know, I felt kind of lost and confused, and,
Yeah.
you know, is that okay kind of thing?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like stories are for me about investigating something that interests me. And
Yeah.
so it's not so much about making an assertion or you know telling something definite. It's about what happens when I'm thinking about these ideas and I start to embody them in a particular space, and just see what happens. And so in that sense, I mean, yeah, it's I see it more like almost like a laboratory or something, you know, or almost like a mad scientist's laboratory where you're experimenting, you don't know what's going to happen, and then suddenly it's alive, and maybe it'll destroy the city, and maybe it won't. So yeah, I mean, I think that I've had that happen a lot when I go out and talk to people, is they want to know what's this about,
Yeah.
and you know, it's like I'm much more interested in what they think it's about, or you know how they respond to it. And there's a range of response that works there. There's productive ambiguity in a lot of my fiction that tries to put the reader in a place where they start to be part of the story or start to complete the story.
Absolutely. I feel that in your work as well. And I'm wondering if you have ever gone back to something you wrote 1 year, 2 years, 5 years or more ago and read it now and think, did I write this? Or, oh, that's, you know, or like it has like a totally different meaning for you, perhaps, even though you wrote the story at some time, right?
Yeah.
Presumably. It was right.
Presumably. Yeah.
You know, right? Because this strange thing, right? So I'm curious to hear about this. If you've ever had this like moment where you're like, oh my God, like, you know, did I write?
That happens to me sometimes. I just was going over the proofs of there's going to be a 25th anniversary edition of 30th anniversary edition, excuse me, of Altman's Tongue, my first book.
Oh yeah.
And so I was reading over that, and some stories I remembered perfectly, others I didn't remember at all, or I started to remember them as I was looking at them, and some really surprised me. It's like there were things I think I saw about them that I wasn't seeing at the time necessarily.
Yeah.
Just because, you know, I think I get so focused sometimes on the language that I you know, it's different to feel like you're reading it from a more objective spot.
Right.
Yeah. And then I had this other experience. I ended up selling my literary papers to Yale University. And when I did, I was going through these old boxes of things, and I found a story that I had no memory of writing. And at first I started reading it and thought, oh, you know, this has got to be someone else wrote this. It's like a student story that's ended up in my work. And then I kept reading it, and the whole way through, I didn't have any memory of having written it. So I felt very much like one of my characters. And then finally I got to the end, and there was a gesture at the end. I was like, oh yeah, this is me. I did this, but I still didn't remember the story at all. So it was very strange. It almost felt like I'd come across a story that had been written by me in an alternate universe.
Right. That's fascinating. That's fascinating. It's like this thing where, right, this whole thing is happening here with your characters, it seems. And so, you know, like that slippery slope, I was reading in preparation, if you will, or, you know, for today, I was reading some earlier interviews you had done with in various places, and I don't remember which one it was, but I think it was from a couple years ago or something, where you had said something to the effect of, well, in my fiction, what it is that's happening for me is that what happens in the fiction is something like, and I'm paraphrasing you and putting it back at you, and you can comment obviously on this. Maybe you don't remember having said this either. I'm not sure, but you gave a story about, you said that there's that slippery slope even in our lives, in our daily lives. And the story you told in this interview was that there was you thought it was a bird that was limping around a parking lot, but it was actually a leaf in the wind.
Yeah.
You know? And that reminded me, without going too deep into slippery slopes, but like there's a parable I'm sort of interested in, like, ancient sort of Hindu and Buddhist philosophy and those kinds of things. And one of the sort of parables or stories that's told, it's like someone sees what they think is a snake and they're scared and they have a reaction like they saw a snake. They think they're in physical, danger, and they realize it's just the rope that was, coiled or something. And so that thing with the leaf reminded me of this. But that's like your fiction does this, but it does it in such a way that it takes the mind of the reader, or lets the reader's mind perhaps take what you've given it and then wrap itself around it in whatever way it wishes to do. Something like that. Is that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think that there's all these moments that we have in daily life that feel very uncertain to us, where we misperceive something or misunderstand something, and we're very good at just kind of correcting and moving on. But a lot of my fiction, I think, wants you to kind of occupy that space where that moment when you think you're seeing one thing and then you realize it's another thing. It can be very weird because it feels like the original thing has been taken away from you, or the world is playing a trick on you. And so I try to get the reader and myself into that position of like what it feels like, that moment of revelation where what you were having an experience with, you realize you wasn't actually there at all. So that experience when I was going across a parking lot and saw what I thought was a bird, I thought about it. I wondered what it was doing. I kind of could see it was moving strangely. So my mind still thought it was a bird. So it processed it and thought, oh, maybe it's herd, or maybe it's protecting its young. And then I kept on getting closer. And then, it wasn't until I was very close that I realized it was a leaf being blown around in the parking lot. And so I'd had an experience with something that wasn't there, but it's a real experience at the same time. And so that's the strange thing to think about. And that moment where suddenly the world changes is a really interesting one, I think. And one that I feel like I'm trying to preserve in my fiction. So, yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say too, this is another small thing. When you're talking about the snake, I don't know that, that particular parable, but I'm sure I would love it. My father-in-law is so afraid of snakes that we have sometimes seen him. He lives on a farm, but sometimes if he has a shovel or something, he'll catch a glimpse of the garden hose behind him and not realize it, and he'll attack it. And so, yeah.
So you've got a lot of electrical tape to patch up those garden hoses, right?
You have to, I think. Yeah, exactly.
Oh man, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. My mom, just now we're talking about these, right? Same with insects. Just she'll just there'll be a hole in the wall to get the spider. Interesting. If I may take just a bit more of your time and go back to something, because actually I'd wanted to comment on this and then went off on another tangent, which is fine and good. But I want to get back to, actually, it's not Fugue State, but your because we did read that that the story about this. Right, you're talking about your latest collection, and someone who doesn't realize that they're a machine. Or doesn't realize that they're not a human, that they weren't born of a human person in the way that we all kind of know or think. A comment you had made was that and I haven't read the book yet. Obviously, I don't have it yet, and I'm looking into it. That some of the machines or robots or post-humans or whatever whatever the word for those characters might be or individuals might be, that they're trying to make their way through the world and learn how to live with humans, you said. Side humans that sometimes don't treat them well. I think that was your comment.
Right, I probably did, yeah.
Yeah, so what I'm curious about, and again, having only read that one piece from the collection so far, and my students also have read that, so they can maybe relate to this a little bit from that perspective. In Japanese, like the typical, like 80s and 90s, whatever it is, like Akira and Ghost in the Shell, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with the animation.
Somewhat, yeah.
But like thematically, what those tend to do is like, yeah, the humans may, well, maybe it is the same. Maybe the humans are treating the machines poorly. But like in our current day, you know, on the news, you get Elon Musk and these people going, oh, they're dangerous. They're going to take over the world, not just our jobs. They're going to, you know, they're going to imprison us. And so like we are slaves to the machines rather than vice versa. And so it sounds like in your stories, well, the humans are the really scary ones and the machines are sort of the victims. So I'm wondering if you could comment on that a bit and your kind of idea about, about the relationship between post-human or AI and humans.
Well, so, I mean, I think that each of those stories that are in that book do something different. So there's one in which it's just machines, but they have kind of programmed themselves to think of themselves as being a family. Yeah. There's this one, the one you're talking about, Never Little, Never Grown, which is about a machine who is very attached to the human that I guess he, for lack of a better word, is with. And keeps on coming against the realization that humans don't live forever, and wants to not have that knowledge, and keeps on taking things out. Yeah. Anyway, it's an interesting, strange concept. Yeah. Or at least I think so. And then there's others that kind of do different things in terms of that. In terms of like there's one in which it's a kind of like an artificial being who's on a starship going somewhere, and who's been trained to be with the children, but also both knows he's different and not different from them at the same time. So trying to figure out what that means and how to understand it. So it's a lot of it is that. I mean, but very little of those stories are about like you know, humans being terrified by AI. I feel like that was a really common thing that you got in like earlier science fiction, that, you know, like the robot stories, the Asimov stories. Then I have, I mean, the other thing, this is not in this book, but it's on Tor.com on the website. I have these weird little fables called After the Animal Flesh Beings, in which basically robots have found bits and fragments of human culture years after the humans are gone, and have these stories that are kind of deformed stories that seem to come from humanity that they're telling. And so it's this kind of attempt of these beings to kind of deal with what came before them. So and that, you know, and that's a way of me kind of imagining, you know, what happens if we wipe ourselves out, or what happens after us.
Yeah, that reminds me a little bit of, I've been sort of not revisiting, but the immobility and this kind of like after, you know, and actually one reason I was thinking about immobility is because you had mentioned with this new collection, I think you had mentioned it to me, or I had read it or something, that it does deal with this kind of like these themes, and immobility somehow deals with that in a way too, right? That like, is this person like fully human, or are the people carrying him, you know, what's going on? It's kind of science fiction. It's kind of post-apocalyptic.
And I do think a lot of my stories are about what does it mean to be human, and sometimes they're approaching it in a kind of very a way like that, where it's almost science fictional, and other times they're approaching it in how if I act in certain ways, does it mean I lose my humanity in some regards? And so that's an exploration that I keep on kind of coming back to for some reason.
Right. Again, I don't want to take too much of your time. I'm sort of, you know, maybe one or two more questions. And
absolutely. We can do that. And if we need to do a follow-up at some point, we can as well, if your class needs it or wants it.
We could, kind of hoping, you know, to get questions, but we've only read a couple. We're doing Mother Tongue today.
Oh,
We
okay.
haven't
Yeah,
done
yeah.
yet. That's the third in the collection. We'll get to that
Great.
today. I love that
Yeah.
story, actually.
Oh,
And
good. I'm
yeah,
glad.
it's a good
Yeah.
story. I mean, I love this collection, obviously. My favorite, I have to, maybe I shouldn't say this, students say, why is this his favorite? I really like Invisible Box. And that's going to be
Yeah.
really interesting one to share with students. I think they'll enjoy
Yeah,
that.
I think that will be interesting. I read that one a lot, and
Yeah,
it's really fun to read because people respond they don't know quite what to make of it. They think it's funny, but they also think it's really, they stop laughing at a certain point.
right, right.
Yeah, and I read it once in an audience, and someone came up after the reading and said, I used to date a mime. And
There's
and
a lot
I
of
said,
stranger fiction.
yeah, and I said, I mean, I'm sorry, and she's like, it was exactly like that. So that won't make any sense to your students till they actually read the story. But yes,
Now this is reminding me of something else. See, this is the problem with me as an interviewer because my brain goes too many tangents
that's
at
okay.
once, and it gets all wrapped up in this messy ball. But what I was going to say is this life being stranger than fiction thing. I think maybe I sent you an article at one point about something similar to this, but then recently I was listening to this speaker. He's actually kind of like a world leader, but also like, this would be interesting to you. Maybe he's a kind of guru, if you will. He's an Indian teacher.
Yeah.
And he was talking about, they were talking about pain in the body. And he was saying that pain is good for us because it helps us to know when something is wrong with our bodies. And are you okay for time? Or are you?
No, I'm good. Sorry. Yeah.
No, I just wanted to make sure. And he said that there was this thing where he said if we didn't have pain, we'd be cutting ourselves to ribbons. Now, this sounds like a strange thing to say, doesn't it? And what he mentioned was there was this thing, I don't know where this comes from, he had seen on the internet or someone had told him about, where these people were like, it's pretty gruesome, but, cutting their fingers off, cutting their hands off, filming it as they were doing it and putting it on YouTube or putting it online.
Wow, that's crazy. Yeah.
And that reminded me of which of your novels.
Yeah.
That's like very
last
right?
days. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's something.
I don't know this novel yet, but maybe you could talk about that a bit.
Yeah, I mean, the Last Days is a novel about a detective who ends up being involved with what a religious cult, and the cult believes that the way you become closer to God is by having less of you. So they give a lot of status to people who amputate, cut off fingers or cut off their hand, or and the more amputations you have, the closer they see you as to God. So it takes this really absurd idea and just tries to take it really seriously and run with it. Hopefully I feel like that's the book of mine, that it's so absurd in some ways and very, very funny, but also a little bit gruesome at the same time. So it's a very strange combination. So
yes, it is.
Yeah,
it's very brilliant work. And you had a follow up to that, or you were?
I finished a follow up called Phantom Limb. That it will come out in late 2025 or early 2026. So it's a ways away still.
Okay. I was wondering about that because I think you had been talking about that like years ago.
I've been working on it forever. Yeah. It just took a long time for me to figure out. Yeah, exactly. So I had an idea for what I wanted to do and wrote about a third of it and then got stuck. And it took me a long time to figure out how to get back to it.
Is that a very long book, or it just took time because it's
not even that long. It just, I don't know. I mean, I think it just, for whatever, I don't know why it took so long, because it shouldn't have taken that long. I mean, I did a lot of other stuff in the meantime.
Yeah, you're always doing, yeah.
But it took me a while I finished the first two sections of it, and then there was a third section, and I just couldn't quite sort out how I wanted to do it. And then, and so I just, I sat on it for a long time, and then periodically would go back to it. And then I was traveling. I was actually doing a reading in Indiana, and just saw something that like made something click for me, and then just wrote it very quickly after that. So, but it's not even as long as Last Days. It's a fairly short novel. So
Okay.
so I should have been able to write it very quickly, but it took like 12 years. So
Sure, but that's kind of cool in itself. I mean, that's a 12-year process for, right? Something that's
yeah. So,
yeah, that's
yeah.
exciting. Let me ask you, because I've been asking, well, we've been talking about all kinds of things, but this is the question that popped in. Say something about your, and I know you've spoken about this elsewhere, but your writing process, and you just mentioned like it took you 12 years to write that. I think you mentioned to us or to me when after The Open Curtain had been published that had also taken you quite some time. Is that right?
Yeah, The Open Curtain was the same way. And actually,
Yeah.
I'm realizing it was very similar in that it was 3 parts. And the first part took about a year. And the second part I did very quickly in 3 weeks because I was at an artist colony. And then the third part took a long, long time. And I think it's partly that if you kind of think of a work as being in parts like that, unless you're very careful, you know that the third part has to do something to bring all the other parts together.
Yeah.
And so trying to figure out how to make that work was complicated for me, I feel like. And with The Open Curtain in particular, it was. And with this one, it was just, you know, one of the things was I wanted it to be a book that was very much in the spirit of Last Days, but also kind of approached things differently. So I took me a while to figure out what that would mean, and you know, I got very, very interested in. Do you know about these experiments that are done with people who have amputated limbs? There's these mirror boxes that they'll set up a mirror box, and so it'll reflect your other. For instance, if you're missing your hand, it'll reflect your other hand in the mirror box reversed, so it looks like you have 2 hands. Right. And so people who have pain in a missing limb, this is very common where they still feel pain. Yeah. They can do this, and it makes the pain go away because they feel like they can move their hand that's not there. So I became really interested in that, and then it just took me a while to figure out what that meant in terms of this novel.
Oh, that's so fascinating.
Yeah.
And there's so much in your work around. I know you had a story called. Well, there's what was it, Baby Leg?
Yes, yeah.
And then you had a story called Leg as well, didn't you? In another collection.
I did, yes.
And then you got Phantom Limb. Okay, so another theme is coming here.
That's true. There's a lot of amputation in my work, but also a lot of legs, apparently. Yeah. Even in my first book, Altman's Tongue, there's a story about someone whose name is Marion Legoff. And she doesn't have legs, and she's put in a kind of isolation tank, and where she imagines that she can walk. And so I don't know. There's something about amputation, but also disability, and that I think is something that I keep on returning to in some ways. I'm not quite, I keep on saying this, but I'm not quite sure why. So yeah,
he's an immobility too, right? He's carried because he doesn't have the legs. So that's interesting. Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's paralyzed. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So the question I wanted to ask, actually, it was a 2-part question. It goes into the writing side of things. The process side of things. Well, first I was going to ask, do you still write with the pen that you were given during the COVID pandemic? I read this in an interview yesterday. I'm not mind reading or like sneaking into your house at night and looking through your notes. I just wondered, do you still have that pen?
I do have that pen still, but periodically. So here's the thing that irritates me. It's a great pen. It's perfect, but it goes through ink so quickly that it drives me nuts because I'm very thrifty, and so I feel like it's starting to run out of ink, and I'm like, I can get a little more ink out of this, and then it makes the writing process just really painful because it takes, sometimes it just doesn't quite work as well. But yeah, I use that pen still quite a bit. I don't use it exclusively, but I do use it a lot, and I do really like it. So yeah, but I can,
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I feel like it's good to be able to, If I feel like I'm using it too much, if I'm becoming too dependent on it, then I just use like a cheap pen or a hotel pen. So yeah.
I see. Try not to get codependent with the pen, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
All right, yeah. So, like as I promised, like one or two more questions, right? So, just on writing. So, what do you mentioned that, like for example, it took you 12 years, and the opening took some time. So, what do you do when you get stuck? That was my question.
I work on something else.
That's what I thought.
So but yeah, I mean, it's actually, I always have a couple of projects going at once. I usually have a novel going, and then one, a short story, sometimes two short stories, and yeah, it's sometimes like I'm working on a novel right now that I haven't written anything on for probably a month, but I've written, worked on short stories in the meantime. And there is something about like just feeling like I can switch that lets my mind sort out things. And so subconsciously, I think I'd solve some problems and issues. And then sometimes, I mean, if I'm stuck and neither of those are working, I'll just take a blank piece of paper and just start. And I've found that if I sit long enough and just kind of can put myself in almost a meditative state, then something interesting will happen. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let me give the final question, and this may be the most important question of the whole thing.
Good to know.
Who is Brian Evenson? That's definitely the most important. The second most important question is: do you still have the Edgar Allan Poe bobblehead in your office that you had?
I'm in my office right now, and let's see.
Can you find it?
Yes, there it is. It's never that far away from me. His head is a little bit broken now, but he's still okay. I mean, I have various things on my shelves. I also made these weird little skulls that are kind of decorated. Yeah, Day of the Dead skulls. And then Max made a Lego thing that my son Max, who's 11 for me. So, but yeah, I still have that Poe. So I'll keep it until the head falls completely off.
Glad to hear that it's still standing, more or less.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your time and your generosity, and thank you for the stories as well.
Oh, you bet. No problem.